So, India is overhauling its century-old labor laws. It's a huge deal, and it's grabbing headlines everywhere. But is it the magic fix for the economy? Well, according to columnist Shankar Iyer, not even close. He says it's just the start of a much, much longer journey. Today, on The Explainer, we're going to dive into his argument about all the other massive reforms India still needs to tackle to really unlock its potential.
Okay, to really get why this is such a big deal, you have to understand that this is not a new problem. I mean, look at this quote from 1931. People were calling for a modern labor policy almost a century ago. That tells you just how deep-rooted and complicated this whole issue really is.
And the person guiding us through this whole maze is columnist Shankar Iyer. His main point? Yeah, the new labor codes are important, they're a big step, but they're really just the starting gun in a marathon of reforms that he says India absolutely has to run.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with that century-old problem the new labor codes are trying to fix. Then we'll get into why the economy is at a real crossroads right now. After that, we'll look at the other big items on the to-do list: power, justice, and cities. And we'll wrap it all up by talking about how to, well, unclog the whole system.
All right, first things first. Let's talk about what kicked off this whole conversation, this massive overhaul of India's labor laws. And let's be real, they're famously complicated. For decades, everyone's been saying they're a huge roadblock for businesses and for creating good, formal jobs.
And the scale of this simplification, I mean, it's just staggering. Just try to imagine you're running a business. You're trying to navigate over 100 different state laws, 40 central laws, almost 1,500 different rules. It's a total nightmare. Now, the new system takes all of that and boils it down. Get this, the number of returns you have to file, it goes from 31 all the way down to just 1. That's a game changer.
But look, this didn't just happen overnight. As you can see from this timeline, this journey started way back in 2017. And even after the central government passed the laws in 2020, getting the states on board has been a real slog. Iyer makes a really interesting point here. The fact that this has been so tough, even for a government with a big majority, kind of shows that there's this underlying political preference for slow, watered-down reforms. And that's a huge challenge in itself.
So that brings up the big question. Why now? Why the huge push all of a sudden? Well, it's because India's economy is really at a crossroads. And frankly, there are some pretty worrying signs flashing on the dashboard.
One of the big red flags Iyer points to is foreign direct investment. It's been pretty lukewarm. You know, in a world where big money is constantly looking for the next best place to grow, any hesitation from investors is a huge signal that something's not quite right, something's holding them back.
And it's not just money from overseas. Indian companies themselves are being cautious. The column points out that big corporations are just sitting on piles of cash, instead of investing it in new factories or tech or anything that creates jobs. When the home team is pessimistic, that's a serious problem. It really puts the brakes on the whole economy.
And this really gets to the heart of the structural problem. A whopping 90% of India's entire workforce is informal. That means no job security, no benefits, no real legal protection. So the whole point of these reforms, the big goal, is to encourage what's called formalization. Basically, to shift the economy so that it creates more of those stable, protected, formal jobs.
Okay, so we've established the labor codes are a big first step, but, and this is Shankar Iyer's central argument, they are just one single piece of a much, much bigger puzzle. If India really wants to unlock its growth potential, it has to start clearing out some other major blockages in the system.
First up on that list, India's power sector. It is, to put it mildly, a mess. It's just plagued with problems. And a huge part of that problem is the state-run power companies, the discoms. They're struggling with everything you can imagine. Unpaid bills, politically popular but financially disastrous subsidies. It's a massive drain on the system.
And the scale of this mess is just mind-boggling. We're talking about over 7 lakh crore rupees in losses. To put that in perspective, that's nearly 90 billion US dollars. This mountain of debt means constant government bailouts. And it means businesses have to pay more for electricity, which of course makes India less competitive on the world stage.
All right, next up, the justice system. This is another huge roadblock. Think about it. If you're an investor, whether you're from India or from another country, the one thing you need to know is that a contract means something. If a legal fight can drag on for years or even decades, that creates a massive amount of uncertainty. It's a huge risk that just scares investment away. And just look at the numbers here. They're wild.
We're talking about over 54 million cases pending in India's courts. That's not just a number on a page. It's a gigantic clog in the pipes of the economy. Money gets trapped, problems don't get solved, and businesses are basically stuck in limbo.
And finally, Ayar brings up India's cities. You've got more than 500 million people living in urban areas now. So things like bad infrastructure, terrible traffic, pollution, these aren't just things that make life unpleasant. They're economic problems. Cities are supposed to be engines of growth, right? And when you neglect them, you're basically holding the whole country back.
So, what's the common thread here? What connects labor laws, power, and the courts? It's all about fixing the basic machinery of the economy. Iyer has a great term for it. He calls it fixing the plumbing.
And a big part of that plumbing problem is what Iyer calls the permission raj. That endless maze of getting clearances, licenses, and jumping through bureaucratic hoops just to get anything done. It slows everything to a crawl. And let's be honest, it opens the door for corruption. Making that simpler is absolutely key to making it easier to do business.
So the really crucial takeaway here is that this isn't about little tweaks here and there. It's about a complete overhaul of that regulatory plumbing that controls the whole economy. The end game is to create a system that's transparent, efficient, and predictable. The kind of place where businesses actually want to invest and create jobs. So, let's wrap this up. The new labor codes, they're a big, important, and necessary first step. No doubt about it. But if India is going to truly take advantage of its huge potential, we're talking about a massive market and a super young population, then that reform energy has to spill over into those other critical areas we talked about: power, justice, and how cities are run. Ultimately, the goal is simple: make India an easier place to do business and a better place to live. And IR finishes his column with a great quote from the poet Robert Frost, which really sums it all up. He reminds us that, progress has been made, but the reform agenda is nowhere near finished. The journey to unlock India's full economic potential is a long one, and as Frost wrote, there are miles to go before we sleep.